A millionaire got a homeless woman he met on the street pregnant. Everyone mocked him, but 2 years later, the streets of Manhattan buzzed with their usual chaotic energy. James Carter, vice president of one of the city's leading investment banks, stepped out of the towering glass building where he had just concluded a grueling day of meetings. His tailored navy suit and polished leather shoes reflected the life he had built, precise, calculated, and successful. Yet as he walked briskly toward his car, something disrupted his carefully planned rhythm. A figure sitting against a brick wall, wrapped in a fraying coat, her face partially obscured by a knit beanie. James paused. He wasn't one to stop for strangers on the street. In New York, it was easier to keep walking. Everyone had their own problems. Everyone was busy. But there was something different about her. Her posture was dignified despite her apparent circumstances. She wasn't holding a sign or asking for anything, just sitting quietly, clutching a worn journal. "Are you okay?" James found himself asking, his voice soft, almost hesitant. The woman looked up, startled. Her deep brown eyes met his, a mix of wariness and defiance flashing in them. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady but distant. "You don't look fine," he said, crouching slightly to meet her at eye level. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Food?" She hesitated, studying him. Olivia Hayes, though James didn't know her name yet, was in the middle of a carefully orchestrated social experiment. An heiress to one of the largest manufacturing fortunes in the country, she had chosen to live as a homeless woman for 3 months. It was a decision born out of frustration with her sheltered life and a desire to understand the realities of those who lived without privilege. She had prepared for every eventuality, except encountering someone like James. "I guess coffee would be nice," she said finally, her guarded tone softening. James gestured toward a nearby diner, the kind of place he hadn't stepped into since his college days. Olivia followed, unsure of why she agreed. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as they sat in a booth by the window. A waitress poured them steaming cups of coffee, and James ordered a sandwich for her, waving off her protests. "What's your name?" he asked, leaning back in his seat. "Liv," she said, offering a clipped version of her real name. "And you?" "James." "So, Liv, how'd you end up here?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. Olivia's mind raced. She had rehearsed a backstory, but now, under his concerned gaze, it felt oddly uncomfortable to recite it. "Life happened," she said evasively, sipping her coffee. "Lost my job. Couldn't keep up with rent. You know how it goes." James nodded, though he didn't really know. He had grown up privileged, attended the best schools, and climbed the corporate ladder with an ease that sometimes embarrassed him. Yet something in her tone, the resignation, the quiet strength, resonated with him. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must be overwhelming." She shrugged, trying to maintain the facade. "You get used to it." Their conversation meandered, touching on books, music, and the city's ruthless pace. Olivia found herself surprised by his sincerity. He wasn't condescending or pitying. He listened, really listened, as though her words mattered. When the waitress brought the check, James slid his credit card across the table before Olivia could protest. "Thank you," she said quietly, as they stepped back onto the cold street. She wasn't used to accepting help, even in her temporary role. "You didn't have to do that." "Maybe not," he said with a small smile, "but I wanted to." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city filling the space between them. Olivia felt an odd pang of regret as she prepared to walk away. "Take care, James," she said, turning toward the subway station. "You too, Liv," he called after her, watching her disappear into the crowd. James returned to his car, unable to shake the feeling that their brief encounter had been significant. Meanwhile, Olivia boarded the subway, clutching her journal tightly. She had met countless people during her experiment, but none like James. There was something about him, his kindness, his quiet confidence, that stayed with her. Neither of them realized that this fleeting moment was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. The warmth of Olivia's penthouse was a stark contrast to the freezing streets she had left behind. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the endless Manhattan skyline glitter below. She should have felt relief returning to her real life, but her thoughts kept drifting back to James. There was something about his unassuming kindness that unsettled her, in the best way. For days, Olivia tried to shake the memory of him. She dove back into her usual routine of meetings and charity boards, but her mind kept wandering. Who was he really? Why had he stopped? Most people hurried past without a glance. Finally, unable to suppress the need to see him again, she made a decision. She would find James and thank him properly, not as Liv, but as herself. James had barely slept since that night. He kept replaying the conversation in his head. Liv wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She was sharp, quick-witted, and carried an air of strength despite her circumstances. Something about her vulnerability had stirred something deep within him, a desire to help, yes, but also a deeper connection he couldn't quite name. As he sat at his desk in the sleek offices of Carter and Whitman, his assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Carter, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Olivia Hayes." James frowned. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Send her in." The woman who entered his office was a far cry from the figure he had met on the street. Her dark hair was neatly styled, and she wore an elegant tailored coat. She walked with confidence, but her face held a flicker of nervousness as their eyes met. "James," she began, her voice steady but soft, "we've met before, though I looked a bit different." He stared at her, the pieces slowly clicking into place. "Liv," he said, incredulous. She nodded, her cheeks flushing. "My name is actually Olivia Hayes. I wasn't completely honest with you. I'm not homeless. I was conducting an experiment to understand what life is like for people on the streets. And that night, when you stopped to help me, I didn't expect it." James leaned back, processing her words. "You're telling me you're not who you seem to be?" Olivia nodded again. "I'm sorry for misleading you, but your kindness, it wasn't something I expected in that moment. You didn't have to stop or help, but you did, and I couldn't just let it end there without telling you the truth." James studied her, his initial shock giving way to something else, admiration, curiosity. "So, you chose to live on the streets, to learn?" "Yes," she said. "My family is wealthy, and I've always had a safety net. But I wanted to understand the reality of people who don't. I thought it would make me a better person, a better leader. But it's harder than I imagined." "Brave," James said after a pause. "Not many people would willingly do something like that." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time she smiled. "Thank you for not being angry." "I'm not angry," James said. "Surprised, sure, but intrigued." Their conversation extended far beyond what either of them had anticipated. Olivia spoke of her frustrations with her sheltered upbringing, her desire to create meaningful change, and her struggles with balancing her ideals with the expectations of her family. James listened, captivated by her authenticity. For the first time in years, James felt himself letting someone in. Olivia's vulnerability mirrored his own unspoken insecurities about his fast-paced corporate life. By the time Olivia left his office, they had agreed to meet again, not by chance, but by choice. That night, as Olivia returned to her world of luxury and James to his meticulous life, they both felt an undeniable shift. Their paths had crossed in a way neither of them could have foreseen, setting the stage for a bond that would challenge their lives in ways neither could predict. The Hayes mansion, nestled in the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley, radiated old money and timeless elegance. Olivia arrived for the weekend, summoned by her father, Richard Hayes, with a tone that brooked no refusal. The family's estate was a stark reminder of her privileged upbringing, and as she walked through its grand doors, a sense of foreboding crept over her. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor Hayes, were already seated in the study, their expressions grim. Richard, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, gestured for her to sit. Eleanor, ever the poised matriarch, wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Olivia," Richard began, his voice measured, "we need to discuss the future of Hayes Industries." Olivia straightened, bracing herself. "What's going on?" Her father exchanged a glance with Eleanor before continuing. "The company is in trouble, severe trouble. A series of bad investments and market shifts have put us on the brink of bankruptcy. We've been keeping this quiet, but we're running out of time." Olivia's heart sank. Despite her complicated feelings about her family's wealth, she had always respected the legacy her father had built. "What are you saying? Is there a plan to fix this?" Richard's expression hardened. "There is. Ethan Callahan." Olivia's stomach twisted at the name. Ethan was the son of Nicholas Callahan, a rival tycoon. She had met him a handful of times at society events. Charming, polished, but with an undercurrent of entitlement that unsettled her. "Ethan has shown interest in you for some time," Eleanor said, her tone carefully neutral. "A union between our families would secure the investment we need to save the company." Olivia stared at them, disbelief giving way to anger. "You're suggesting an arranged marriage in this century?" "It's not ideal," Richard admitted, "but it's practical. Ethan is willing, and his father is eager to solidify the partnership." Olivia stood, pacing the room. "And what about what I want? Does that matter at all?" "Olivia," Eleanor said gently, "this isn't just about you. It's about saving the livelihoods of thousands of people who depend on Hayes Industries. Sometimes sacrifices must be made." The weight of the situation pressed down on her. She knew her parents were desperate, but the idea of tying her life to Ethan felt suffocating. "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice trembling. That evening, Olivia called James. She didn't know why she reached out to him. It felt impulsive, even reckless, but she needed someone to talk to. When he picked up, his voice instantly soothed her nerves. "Olivia, is everything okay?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "Can you meet me?" Within an hour, they were sitting in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. Olivia recounted everything: her family's financial troubles, the proposal of marriage, and the impossible choice she faced. James listened intently, his brow furrowed. "An arranged marriage? That's absurd." "Tell that to my parents," Olivia said bitterly. "They see it as the only solution." "Do you?" James asked, leaning forward. She hesitated. "No, but I don't see another way out." James was silent for a moment, his mind working. "What if there is another way?" he said finally. "What if I can help?" Olivia frowned. "Help? How?" "Let me think on it," James said. "I don't have an answer yet, but I know this much. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your life for this." His words stirred something in her, hope, mixed with an undeniable connection that had grown between them. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. Meanwhile, in a penthouse across town, Nicholas Callahan poured himself a glass of scotch. His son, Ethan, sat across from him, watching the city lights. "You're prepared to do what's necessary, right?" Nicholas asked, his tone commanding. Ethan nodded, though his jaw tightened. "I'll do what's expected." "Good," Nicholas said, his eyes gleaming. "Because this deal will secure our position for decades. Nothing can interfere with it, not even Olivia Hayes." Unbeknownst to them, interference was exactly what James Carter was planning. James spent the next 2 days buried in spreadsheets, financial reports, and phone calls. As the vice president of Carter and Whitman, he had access to resources and networks that could be pivotal in saving Hayes Industries. But this wasn't just about business. It was about Olivia, her independence, her future, and the growing bond he couldn't ignore. Olivia, meanwhile, felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. When James called her to meet, she arrived at his office, unsure of what to expect. His sleek corner office, with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, was a stark contrast to the quiet cafe where they'd last met. "Thanks for coming," James said, rising to greet her. His expression was serious but warm. "I think I've found a way to help." Olivia took a seat, her heart racing. "I'm listening." James pulled up a presentation on his laptop. "The problem with Hayes Industries isn't just cash flow, it's structural inefficiency. Your company has outdated processes, and the competition has been outpacing you for years. Injecting capital will only delay the inevitable unless systemic changes are made." Olivia nodded, her mind racing. "So what's the solution?" "I've identified a group of private equity investors who specialize in turning around companies like yours. They're willing to invest if Hayes Industries agrees to a restructuring plan. It won't be easy. There will be cuts, and your family will have to relinquish some control, but it's a viable alternative to a marriage alliance." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "James, this is incredible, but why are you doing this?" He hesitated, his eyes locking with hers. "Because I believe in you, and because you deserve a choice." The following week, James and Olivia met with the potential investors. Richard and Eleanor Hayes were skeptical at first, especially when James outlined the conditions of the deal. Relinquishing control was a bitter pill for Richard to swallow, but the numbers didn't lie. After hours of debate, Richard finally agreed to consider the proposal. However, not everyone was pleased. Word of the plan reached Nicholas Callahan, who saw it as a direct threat to his interests. In his eyes, the alliance between the Callahan and Hayes families wasn't just a business opportunity, it was a power move to consolidate his influence. "This James Carter," Nicholas growled to his advisors, "is a problem." As James and Olivia worked tirelessly to finalize the details, their bond deepened. Late nights in conference rooms turned into quiet conversations over takeout. Olivia found herself drawn not just to James's intelligence and determination, but to the quiet kindness that had first drawn her to him on the street. James, for his part, admired Olivia's resilience and newfound confidence in steering her family's company toward a brighter future. But their progress wasn't without obstacles. Nicholas Callahan began a smear campaign, planting rumors about Hayes Industries' instability and James's supposed ulterior motives. Tensions rose as Olivia's parents began to waver, questioning whether James's plan could withstand the scrutiny. "It's too risky," Richard argued during a family meeting. "The Callahans are already moving to block us." Olivia, emboldened by James's unwavering support, stood her ground. "We're not just saving the company, we're doing what's right. I'm not going to marry Ethan just to preserve appearances." The turning point came during a high-stakes board meeting at Hayes Industries. James presented his restructuring plan to the board, fielding tough questions with calm authority. Olivia watched in awe as he dismantled every objection with data, strategy, and conviction. By the end of the meeting, the board voted in favor of pursuing the private equity deal. It was a victory, but a precarious one. Nicholas, enraged by the setback, vowed to retaliate. "If they think this is over," he told Ethan, "they're mistaken." Ethan, however, was beginning to have doubts. For years, he had been a pawn in his father's schemes, but Olivia's determination and James's integrity stirred something in him. He began to question whether his father's ruthless tactics were worth the cost. That night, as Olivia and James celebrated their small victory over a quiet dinner, she looked at him with gratitude and something more. "You've done so much for me," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," James replied, his voice equally tender. "This isn't just about business, Olivia. It's about you, and I'll stand by you no matter what." In that moment, amidst the chaos and looming threats, they found solace in each other. But the storm brewing around them was far from over. Ethan Callahan sat in his father's lavish penthouse, staring at the stack of documents Nicholas had handed him. They were contracts, leverage points, and veiled threats, a detailed roadmap of how Nicholas intended to dismantle Hayes Industries if Olivia refused the marriage alliance. Ethan's stomach churned. He had always known his father was ruthless, but this was something else entirely. "Are you paying attention?" Nicholas barked, swirling a glass of scotch. "This isn't just about business, Ethan. It's about legacy, our family's legacy." Ethan nodded mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere. For weeks, he had watched Olivia and James fight against impossible odds. Unlike his father's manipulations, their actions were rooted in something real: principles, integrity. For the first time, Ethan questioned where his loyalty truly lay. Meanwhile, Olivia and James were nearing the finish line with the restructuring plan. The private equity investors were ready to commit, but they needed one final piece: undisputable proof of Hayes Industries' solvency. The pressure weighed heavily on Olivia, who had been working tirelessly to convince her parents and the board that this was the right path. "You're doing everything right," James reassured her one evening as they reviewed the latest financials. "We're almost there." "Almost isn't enough," Olivia said, her voice tight with frustration. "Nicholas won't stop until we fail." James reached across the table, taking her hand. "Then we won't stop either." The following week, the tension reached a boiling point. Nicholas executed his counterstrike, using his connections to halt the private equity deal. Rumors spread through the financial sector, planting seeds of doubt about Hayes Industries' viability. Richard Hayes, already hesitant about relinquishing control, began to buckle under the pressure. "We can't fight this," Richard said during a heated family meeting. "Nicholas has too much power. We should reconsider the Callahan alliance." "No," Olivia said firmly. "We're not caving to him. We've come too far." "And lost too much," her father retorted. "This isn't just about you, Olivia. It's about the company, about survival." As the argument escalated, Olivia's phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "We need to talk. I have something that can help." Ethan and Olivia met late that night in a quiet corner of Central Park. Ethan looked uneasy, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a rare vulnerability. "I'm done with my father's games," he said, handing her a flash drive. "These are internal documents, emails, financial records, everything. They prove Nicholas has been orchestrating this entire crisis to force your hand. If you expose this, it will end him." But, Olivia asked, her voice wary. "It will destroy my father's reputation, and it might destroy me too." Olivia stared at him, conflicted. Ethan's willingness to betray his father wasn't something she had anticipated. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of being his pawn," Ethan said, his voice heavy with resignation, "and because you deserve better than this." The next day, Olivia and James presented the evidence to their legal team. The documents were damning, revealing a web of illegal activities orchestrated by Nicholas Callahan to manipulate the market and sabotage Hayes Industries. With the legal team's guidance, Olivia filed a formal complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The fallout was swift and devastating. Nicholas Callahan's empire crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny and legal investigations. The private equity deal, now free from interference, moved forward, securing Hayes Industries' future. As the dust settled, Ethan confronted his father for the last time. Nicholas, stripped of his power and influence, lashed out in desperation. "You think you've won, boy?" he snarled. "You've doomed us both." "No," Ethan replied, his voice calm. "I've freed myself." At Hayes Industries, the mood was one of cautious celebration. Olivia's determination and James's unwavering support had not only saved the company, but redefined its future. As they stood in the company's boardroom, overlooking the bustling city below, Olivia turned to James. "We did it," she said, a mix of disbelief and relief in her voice. "You did it," James corrected, smiling. "I just believed in you." She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. "You did more than that, James. You stood by me when no one else would. You gave me hope." Before he could respond, she leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. In that moment, the chaos and uncertainty of the past weeks melted away, leaving only the future, a future they would build together. The boardroom of Hayes Industries was filled with an air of optimism that hadn't been felt in years. The deal with the private equity firm was officially sealed, and the company was on a path to recovery. Olivia, now positioned as the company's co-CEO alongside her father, stood at the helm of a renewed legacy. James watched her from across the room as she addressed the board, her confidence radiant. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short time. She had gone from a woman burdened by the expectations of her privileged life to a leader carving her own path. He couldn't help but smile, knowing he had played a small part in her transformation. After the meeting, Olivia and James walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan. For the first time in weeks, there was no pressing crisis to solve. They stopped at a quiet park, where Olivia finally allowed herself to exhale. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said, looking up at him. "You could have," James replied, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." They sat on a bench, and Olivia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" James reached into his pocket, his heart pounding. He had thought about this moment for days, but wasn't sure when or if it would feel right. Now, with her beside him and the weight of their challenges behind them, it felt like the perfect time. "I think about it all the time," he said, pulling out a small velvet box. Olivia's eyes widened as he opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Olivia Hayes," he said, his voice steady, "you've changed my life in ways I didn't think possible. You've shown me what it means to fight for something bigger than myself. I don't just want to be part of your life. I want to build one with you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she nodded, a brilliant smile spreading across her face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. 1,000 times yes. The engagement was met with joy from most quarters, though it sent ripples through New York's elite. While Olivia's parents were initially skeptical of her choice, they eventually came to see James, not only as a capable partner for Olivia, but as someone who genuinely cared for her and their family's legacy. Ethan, now free from his father's shadow, reached out to Olivia to offer his congratulations. "You're going to do great things," he told her. "Both of you." "And so will you," Olivia replied. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan smiled faintly. "Just don't forget to invite me to the wedding." In the months that followed, Olivia and James became a force to be reckoned with. Together, they not only strengthened Hayes Industries, but also launched initiatives to support underprivileged communities, a cause Olivia had become deeply passionate about after her experiment. They established a foundation to provide housing and job opportunities for those in need, ensuring their wealth was a tool for change. Their wedding was a beautiful, intimate affair held in the countryside, far from the chaos of the city. As Olivia walked down the aisle, Her heart swelled with gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. When she reached James, she saw in his eyes the same kindness that had drawn her to him that fateful night on the streets. Their story didn't end with the wedding, but rather began anew. Together, they faced the challenges of running a business, navigating the scrutiny of their high-profile lives, and building a family rooted in love and shared purpose. And while the scars of their battle with Nicholas Callahan lingered, they used those lessons to guide their decisions, ensuring they never lost sight of what truly mattered. In the end, their journey wasn't just about saving a company or overcoming a crisis. It was about finding each other, breaking free from the expectations of the world, and building a life that was unapologetically their own. A life filled with love, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had made a difference. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.